Hi, I welcome you all here in my house, right at my kitchen table, and I hope you are having a wonderful time. First, I would love to thank the organizers of this event for bringing the community together and to be able to learn from each other and gain a bit of this community feeling. Now it's so hard to physically get together. And thank you for joining me for my talk, First-Hand Experiences with HoloLens 2. Um, I will be diving into Unity shortly, but first let me introduce myself. My name is Roland Smank. I'm a creative developer with over 20 years of experience in developing interactive experiences. And I'm passionate about mixing the digital and the physical world in interesting new ways. And as you can see here, that all, often involves combining my software with um, the physical environment to create a new experience. And the last 3 years, I more and more became a HoloLens developer. First with the HoloLens 1, and about half a year ago, I received my HoloLens 2. And you may all be familiar with the improvements that the HoloLens 2 brought, basically better specs. But for me, the single most important thing about the improvements that HoloLens 2 brings um, is now being able to interact with holograms with your bare hands. Um, so touching 3D objects that are believably in front of you and being able to interact with them and manipulate them. And Microsoft calls these instinctual interactions. I looked up a picture of Schlesinger, which is over 100 years old, and here you can see the different ways that we use our hands to manipulate objects. And as you can see, the hand is a very versatile tool and can adapt to all kinds of um, environmental challenges. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to explore these interactions in combination with the holographic world or 3D objects that you see in front of you. And not only that, but because what I also find interesting is how holograms can respond to your presence. So that's why I created this short experiment where the childhood dream of having a little friend that can sit on your hand and that you can play with. Well, that I tried to bring that alive in this short demo. But today we will be doing a little bit different things because we will look at the tools that the Mixed Reality ToolKit offers us to build hand interactions, which will cover a number of these hand interactions or the hand poses that we already saw in the taxonomy. So let's dive into Unity. So here's my first scene in Unity. It's based on Unity 2019.4.10, and I imported the Mixed Reality Toolkit with help of the Unity Package Manager and initialize this scene with the standard Mixed Reality Toolkit configuration tree. And the profile is set to default HoloLens 2 configuration profile, which means that it activates the right inputs for a HoloLens 1 or a HoloLens 2, and there's no spatial awareness enabled, no extensions. Okay, so and I imported the rose object, which is a regular mesh. Let's add a mesh collider so we can work with it if we want to manipulate it. And let's add the object manipulator, which is the new object manipulation script. And if you attach this to an object combined with a collider, then you can configure it to make this this hologram, this 3D object, interactive. It's highly configurable, so you can make it interact with near interactions. So you can pick it up directly or with remote interactions, far interactions where you use your hand raise to manipulate the distance. It works with one or can work with one or two. You can apply smoothing and respond to events. Typically, you will attach audio here to make it clear that a manipulation has started and a manipulation has ended. And in this case, we also want to add a constraint. As you can see, it's using a constraint manager. That's a different script or a different component that's shown here. And I'd like to add a rotation axis constraint, which is automatically added. In this case, it's at the top, at the bottom. And I'd like to constrain the X and Z axis, so it now only will rotate along the y-axis, so it will stay upright. So basically now we have an object that can be manipulated on the HoloLens. So let's take a look at what this looks like on the HoloLens 2. It's a bit low. So I can now interact with the rows, can pick it up, can rotate it, but it's impossible to rotate it along different axes than the X and Z axis. So I can directly manipulate it, as you can see, but I can also manipulate it at distance and scale it, translate it. So it's as easy as that. Let's return to Unity. So we're now back in Unity, and as you just saw, I had a visualization of the spatial mesh enabled. I will show you how that's done. I cloned the default HoloLens 2 configuration profile, called it first-hand toolkit configuration profile. I enabled the spatial awareness system, cloned the default mixed reality spatial awareness system profile and called it first-hand spatial awareness system profile. As you can see, there are two spatial observers in here. The spatial object mesh observer loads a fixed mesh and will be shown in the editor. And the Windows Mixed Reality Spatial Mesh Observer will run on the HoloLens 2 and dynamically update the spatial mesh. And here in the visible material, which was, I think was set to a standard occlusion material, I added a HoloLens 2 first hand spatial mesh visible material. And this material is a fairly simple material which adds a texture onto the surfaces that are facing upward. So you can set a bit of scaling, and I believe the angle of the threshold angle for showing the texture. For the next step, I created a prefab from the druggable rows, and now we're going to place roses onto other holographic objects in the scene. For that, I added a cube object called spawn on object. It's basically a mesh, a cube mesh. Added a box collider, the object manipulator script with a constraint manager, and also a rotation axis constraint. I added the pointer handler, which is basically a generic way of hooking up pointer responses, and I'm hooked up the onPointer-clicked event to the spawn on object script, which is a custom custom script I will soon show you. And this tells us the root of the object where we want to spawn these new objects and the prefab to spawn. Let's go here, spawn on object, which is this object. This is called by the pointer handler. This event takes the event data, instantiates the prefab at the position that we get from the pointer interaction, and sets the rotation to an identity rotation, and parented it to the parent transform that's given here. So let's look at what this looks like in HoloLens 2. So here's our object. Okay. Position it a little bit lower. Right. Click it here. You'll see that roses are placed. You can also touch the object and generate new roses. And since these are the prefab objects, we can still pick them up and manipulate them. So that's how easy it is to be able to instantiate objects onto other 3D objects in the scene. So as you saw, it's quite easy to spawn new objects onto an object in the scene by using the pointer handler. But what's more interesting is actually spawning objects onto the spatial mesh. It's a little bit more involved because we cannot directly attach the pointer event handler or the pointer handler to a spatial mesh. So we need to do that by code. Let's look at it here. So I created this spawn on a spatial mesh object, which is the container for the spawn on spatial mesh script. Similar to the other script, I give it the prefab to spawn and the parent to attach the object to. And in this case, I set a layer mask, so it only listens to intersections with the actual spatial awareness mask, the spatial awareness mesh. I added a configurable offset. In this case, it's 0, 0, 0. And there's an angle threshold, so I will only place roses onto slopes that are more or less horizontal. So I cannot place roses onto a vertical wall. Let's look at this script, spawn on spatial mesh. So the thing that we need to do is to manually get the mixed reality input system, and as you can see here, this spawn spatial mesh is implementing the iMixed Reality pointer handler interface, but we need to register it here to the service, and we also unregister it on disabling of the service. And as you can see, there's the onPointer-clicked event that we saw in the pointer handler, pointer down, pointer drag, pointer up, and those are empty. And we're going to handle the pointer-clicked event, do some basic safety checking. And here we calculate the angle of the normal at the intersection point with the up vector. And if it's below the given threshold, it will go through. And here we filter based on the layer mask. And if this also works, then we say instantiate the new object at the given point with the offset. And in this case, we also added an orient to camera, so the roses are always orienting to the way that the viewer is looking. And parented to this given parent transform. And the code for the orient to camera is here. So let's see what this looks like in HoloLens. Let's start this scene. So we can look at the spatial mesh and see where we can place these objects. And if I tap there, I can place new roses, and as you can see, if I look from the other direction, then they're oriented in the way that I was looking. And also these are still the trackable objects, and that's the way you can plant roses on your kitchen table. So for the next experiment with hand interaction, we are going to step away from the object manipulator and look at physics interaction. And with physics interaction, you would be able to push objects with your hand, because with the object manipulator, the scripts are listening to basically gesturing of your mouse and index finger, and then responding to that with respect to the hologram for implementing the near and far interaction and the rotation, translation, scaling behavior. So it's more gesture based. But with the physics interaction, it will be possible to have your hand collide with objects. For that, we need to register a new extension service. In this case, it's called the hand physics service, and it has a default hand service configuration profile, and we call it hand physics service, just to keep it consistent. And this tells us what the hand physics layer will be. And by default, the fingertip has a kinematic body, so the fingertips will have physics objects that we can use to push objects. But we could also introduce a hand palm physics object. So not only the fingertips, but also the palm will have a rigid body attached to it. I believe it's the physics. I believe the fingertips, yes, are sphere objects, so tiny spheres, and the palm is a box collider. If we're using physics, we also need to have objects that can respond to physics. In this case, I added a tree trunk, which is a basic. So let's introduce it here. It's a basic mesh, and I added a mesh collider. And this placement is just to make sure that it's reset. If it falls down through the spatial mesh, then the object will be reset to reappear in the scene. So there's the mesh collider, and it has a rigid body attached with some default settings. And I also added the spawn on spatial mesh, but in this case I will add the tree stump, which I created a prefab for. But it will be added to the trunks transform, which is an empty transform. And we offset it 30 centimeters above the spatial mesh, so the tree trunk will come in falling, and will always end up on top of the spatial mesh instead of inside or even below it. And then we'll see what we how we can interact with it. Let's see how this looks in HoloLens 2. So here's our tree trunk that we initially added to the scene. I can add a few more by tapping on the spatial mesh. And a few of these tree trunks will come dropping in and respond to each other. And if I push my hand through them, so they will drop off the table. So I can touch it with my index finger. I can also push it with my palm of my hand. So there's no object manipulation currently in this object, because they will probably conflict with each other. So in this case, I can move it by using physics. So for the next demo, I wanted to expand a little bit on the planting of the rows. And instead of planting it by using a tap on the spatial mesh, I want to use a small object like a seed, and be able to drop those on the spatial mesh, and then the rows will come grow out of it. So for that, I added the rows object here, which is only the mesh object in this case. So no object handler here. There's a seed object below here, and initially the rows will be hidden, and the seed object will be shown if you manipulate it. And the rows will appear with a little bit of an animation that I created a shader for, so it will create a little bit of an appearance as soon as it is planted in the ground. So what I did, I created an object with a sphere collider, which matches the seed object. This one has, sorry for the scrolling, has an object manipulator added to it to be able to drag the seed around. And as soon as this object comes alive, it will have a collider attached to it. As soon as it is dropped, it will have a collider attached to it and a physical kinematic body. And when it interacts with or collides with your spatial mesh, then the event will pick that up, disable the physics, and animate in the rows. And this is all done in the seed script. Let's take a look at that script. So we disable the rows, which is in the growth renderer. If it's activated, we can see that is that object or that event is triggered as soon as the manipulation ends. So then we activate the seed. Yeah, let's take a look at that. So we add the rigid body object and initialize it, and because of the rigid body attached and the collider, it will start dropping. And as soon as it collides with the spatial mesh, it will generate an on-collision enter event, and then we can see if it's actually with the spatial mesh. Disable the rigid body, disable the collider, orient to camera, and then we can start our appearance routine, which is a coroutine. So it will be running over multiple frames. We play the seed audio script to add a little bit of magic to the planting of holographic flowers, and it will update in progress float that will be used to update the animation. Um, and then we will update the shader to show the animation. Okay, let's take a look at what this looks like in HoloLens. So here's our seed. We can pick it up, and as soon as we drop it, I think the audio is a little bit minimized. Then it will drop it here. As I said, this has no longer has an object manipulator attached. This is a way to position objects in the scene. So as a final step, I decided to create a menu where I can put these different seeds into a single menu, and a little bit inspired by the wrist pocket that you have in Half-Life Alyx. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there you had wrist pockets attached to your wrist where you could save hand grenades. In this case, we will be storing seeds in there, and you can select different seeds and pick them up and drop them in the world to plant different seeds across your living room or kitchen table, for that matter. So this object contains a solver, and the solver runs to multiple constraints. In this case, there's a hand constraint, which will be listening to the position of your hand and the orientation of your palm. And it will activate a certain object, in this case the visuals game object, which is the visual representation of the menu. So the hand menu will only show up as soon as you turn your wrist upwards. The visuals is basically a collection of buttons with empty containers, because I will spawn new seeds in these containers. You can actually pick out seeds from the container. It will spawn a new object in there. So it has empty containers, and there is where is that? There are also solver handlers attached to each object, and they track the main object with different offsets. So it's some little bit of animation in the hand menu, and that's basically copied from one of the examples. But instead of working with real with buttons, I decided to work with empty containers. So there's an empty container in each of these button hand menu locations. You can attach different prefabs to each object. But these objects will need to be spawned. This is called auto spawn in transform. Let's look at what this script does. So it basically monitors if the transform of this game object that it is attached to see if there are any children. If there are no children in it, then it will invoke a new respawn, and the respawn will generate or instantiate a new prefab and also animate it a little bit, so the seeds will scale in. And that should be enough to be able to spawn new seeds in your hand menu, pick them up, and use them in this in the HoloLens to place objects on the real world. Okay, let's go to HoloLens to see what this final demo does. So we now hold my palm up. Then there will be 3 different seats. As you can see these lagging a little bit behind. You can take the first seat, bring it out there, it will grow a rose. Have a yellow seed, drop it over here. Oh, seem to have fallen through the spatial mesh. Drop another one. It's a sunflower. Finally, a blue one. If I drop it over here, it will generate a blue bonnet. As you can see, if I pick up the object from the hand menu, it will respawn a new one as soon as it's removed from the parent. So in this way, I can now generate a flower garden in my kitchen. So this was a first look at the ways that you can implement hand interactions with HoloLens 2. The source code for all the examples and the complete demo is available on GitHub, and you see the URL right here. And that concludes my talk. Hope you liked it.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, how are you? Great.
Fine, thank you.
Awesome.
For you?
I'm doing great. Great presentation. You did great.
Thank you.
I was wowed by the huge potentials of the HoloLens 2 and how easy it was to actually create content and engage with it immediately. Okay. Someone is asking the question, how do you handle finger occlusion with the MRTK?
Sorry, how do you handle finger
Yes.
occlusion? Yeah, in this case, I think you may have noticed that there was a little bit of a shadow that was occluding the spatial mesh. And it's basically an occlusion material that's applied to the hand mesh. I think the most common example is using the hand mesh material which shows these colored triangles, but you can also replace it with a simple occlusion mesh that can also be used on the spatial mesh, and then it will render your hands on top of your real hands with a little bit of lagging behind, but and it will occlude other objects. That's the way it was done. So it's hidden in the configuration tree somewhere. I don't have it in front of me right now, but yeah.
Okay, great. I have some questions if that's okay.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great. So my question is, do you believe that with the HoloLens 2, we'll be able to prototype very fast than other devices?
What other devices are you thinking about?
Like other AR devices that are not as advanced as the HoloLens 2?
Yeah, I think you can prototype pretty quickly, and that's thanks to the tools that Microsoft already created. and they are very flexible if you like to try out new things that are not in there. And yeah, so it's quick to set up experiments and make use of the things that they already implemented for you. But it's also very doable to expand on that yourselves. But so that's great.
Great. Hopefully I'll try the HoloLens 2 soon and
Mm-hmm.
give more feedback on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, great. So thank you so much. You have any thoughts to share?
Sorry, if I've
Any final feedback? Maybe advice?
about using HoloLens or.
Yes.
Yeah, you just need to experience it yourself to it's yeah. I've been working with 3D for over 20 years, and now for the first time in it's possible to actually see a 3D object in front of you and manipulate it, and that's just magic. Yeah, I love it. So I think we'll see a lot of new interactions come up, and there's a lot of stuff to be discovered, and a lot of mistakes to be made, probably also. But yeah, I love experimenting with it. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Someone is asking a question. Can we use controllers with the HoloLens as with the mixed reality headsets?
There's no. I'm not sure about the Xbox controller if that's available. I don't know that. I would have to look that up. But there are no other controllers. With the previous HoloLens, we had the clicker. That's gone with HoloLens 2. And we also had the opportunity to work with the Xbox controller previously, but I'm not sure if that's available. So yeah, oh no, the Xbox controller was for use in within Unity, so not in combination with the HoloLens. So I'm not aware of any external hardware that can be used with HoloLens 2 right now as extra controllers or as physical controllers.
Okay, that's fine. Great. So thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Have a great day. So thank you all for joining the session. Coming up, we're having another session soon, and it will be great to have each and every one of you on board. So thank you and enjoy this video. It's going to be talking about how to win some great stuff at the Global SR Bootcamp and also showcasing our wonderful sponsors for the sessions. Thank you.